It's really important that everybody takes the initiative on their skill and expertise and figures out how they should be affecting the outcome and providing value in there and providing their own sense of leadership, because leadership doesn't come from just one person.
Welcome to Suffolk's Lessons in Leadership podcast, where we have authentic, wide-ranging conversations on leadership. Each conversation is a deep dive between external experts and Suffolk team members and is designed to help our people build their leadership skills, think creatively, and redefine what's possible. We're joined in this episode by Suffolk National President and Chief Operating Officer Tim Stroud and Parker Mundt, Vice President of Platform at Suffolk Technologies, our venture capital platform for built world startups. Today, coming to you from Normandy, France, the site of the World War II D-Day invasion, we'll explore how to build a great team. During our leadership retreat in Normandy, we ran a subarctic exercise where teams had 35 minutes to figure out how to survive a plane crash. Tim and Parker will talk about what they learned during that simulation. I also want to highlight a conversation we had with Boris Groysberg, a professor in the Organizational Business Unit at Harvard Business School and a longtime Suffolk partner. Boris, who ran the subarctic simulation while we were in Normandy, shares what he took away from the results. I'm Jay Tangney, your host for today's podcast. We're thrilled that you guys are here this morning joining us. Before we dig into subarctic, take a minute and give us your reactions after a couple of days here in Normandy and visiting places like Omaha Beach and Utah Beach and some of these really incredible monuments to what happened back in 1944. Tim?
It's been really a phenomenal experience. I think the amount of sacrifice has been the most overwhelming point that has been realized as we've been here. A lot of lessons about leadership, a lot of team building and camaraderie, I think, amongst our own teams, thinking about how what happened here applies to the business environment and how bringing strong teams together with, a sense of purpose and an alignment around what it is that we're trying to accomplish has been really impactful as a group. But I think overall, for me personally, it's been eye-opening just in terms of understanding, how the world could be different if these groups of people didn't come together in alignment the way that they did to accomplish some pretty amazing things.
So true, so true. What do you think, Parker?
Yeah, it's been hard to relate to it, honestly. I don't think I've seen anything or felt anything like it. I think for me personally, it's brought a lot of pride into my life. It's redefined for me what it means to be American. Driving through these small cities and towns and around Normandy and seeing American flags everywhere and having people that have lived here for a long time explain to you they'll never forget the sacrifice that men from our country gave to make the world a better place. I'm not sure there's anything that's ever going to move me the way that it has. And to be able to spend it with people that you spend most of the time working with, it's offered a different dynamic to the leadership group here at Suffolk, and it's been an amazing experience, and I feel super fortunate to be able to be here.
It's really unique, having been here for a few days now, and you both know Colonel Woodruff, and he was in one of our other podcasts, and some of the things that he's said this week have really stayed with me. For example, these were regular young men from every walk of life in the United States who came voluntarily, in most cases, to do what needed to be done, knowing what the likely outcome was. And it's a testament to that sort of courage that we're sitting here right now, right? But in terms of sort of leadership and vulnerability and things that could apply to us in some small way as we go through the Normandy experience, the fact that they were regular people who were willing to be on this team notwithstanding what they were facing, is one of the key things that made it happen, right? I think there are lessons there that apply to us at Suffolk and some of the complexities we face every day, again, with regular people trying to do their best to get complicated things done and be good teammates, which is why we did the subarctic exercise, obviously focused on team building in a really complex environment. What was your first reaction to the subarctic exercise, Tim, as someone who really works in a team environment all day, every day?
The subarctic exercise was really interesting because it raised a topic that many of the team members in our group didn't know a whole lot about. And it was really interesting to see the team dynamic when posed with a complex question or something with an uncertain outcome, how we would align as a group of individuals around trying to come up with a solution to the problem, but figure out how to work together, leveraging each other's skill sets. I think what we quickly realized through it was that initial reaction that we had around uncertainty became more comfortable as we realized the skill sets of the team members in the room, and that we probably had a good shot at solving the problem if we leveraged all those skill sets together.
It's an interesting dynamic when a team comes together in a high-risk environment, right? Parker, what surprised you about the whole exercise?
Something that stuck out the most to me was you didn't have time to prepare for it. So there wasn't time to build up a process or a strategy. It was that came together as you were starting to talk, and the clock is ticking. And so for us, and Tim and I happen to be on the same team, both of us are dead. We tried to run away from the crash site. But for us, it was interesting because we didn't build consensus or have a strategy until probably, 25 minutes in?
Yes.
I think 25 minutes in. And so when you look back on it, you're like, what were we doing? And you maybe think, it was worthwhile to hear everyone's point of view before you started to make decisions. But I think for us, and for me in particular, it was really interesting to look back on how people approached the same problem. And you didn't really have a lot of time to talk about, what we're going to do and who's going to do what and how do we build consensus.
So it's a great point, and I think it's directly on point for life at Suffolk on a job site. So anywhere USA job site, it's 7:30 in the morning, and there's a safety incident. Someone falls down a ladder. Everything stops. Suffolk team gets together in this high-pressure environment where you may have OSHA come in. You're certainly going to have a lot of oversight from our safety team. The leadership chain of command on the job needs to evaluate the entire situation, and there's a lot of moving parts. There's some pressure, and everybody gets into a room, regardless of where you're on the chain of command, kind of like this exercise, right, where you can't, to your point, Parker, think too much in advance about what you're going to say and what the politics of the group dynamic are. So, Tim, what's a takeaway from subarctic in terms of that dynamic and what happens on a Suffolk job site from a leadership perspective? What's a leadership takeaway from that exercise that you can walk back to a Suffolk job and say, okay, I learned this in this exercise. I'm going to do this a little differently as a leader the next time something comes up on a Suffolk job site, because we know things happen. It's a complex environment.
I think the biggest takeaway for me was around, strategy over process, right? We always try to come up with the perfect solution to what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And in your analogy around a safety incident, there's tasks that need to be handled and who's going to go handle those tasks. I think what we learned in the process of going through this is that the process is really important, because there are voices and good ideas that are out there that sometimes don't get heard. And when you have a team dynamic and there's a lot of people involved that come from diverse perspectives, and professional skill sets, you've got a safety person, you've got a public communications person, in your example, you've got leadership and team leadership and subcontractor leadership, all these folks trying to come together to solve, a unique, issue at hand. The process that you go through amongst hearing those diverse experiences or hearing those diverse opinions about what are the things that are important, the things that we need to take care of, can get washed out in the procedure that you go through in terms of trying to determine what the next directive is. And so if you don't actually take the time to listen to individual perspectives, you lose value of the team, and the value of the team certainly is what is the collaboration of the folks that are coming together. The outcome of the exercise certainly was that the teams that came together with the diverse perspectives did better than the teams that didn't. So any one individual perspective that's getting projected across a team can be very detrimental to the overall team.
So that's an important point that I think let's just take a minute on. And it didn't surprise me, but the consistency of the result, I think, was really positive. So you just alluded to the fact that in this exercise, everyone has to do an individual evaluation of the survival tools to try and get you through 14 plus days in the subarctic, right? In every case, on every team, the team results were materially better than any one individual result. And that says a lot about the team dynamic, right? So to your point, Tim, there's pressure for everyone to speak on these teams, and your survival's at stake, right? So one of the most important things that I took away from the exercise, having done it now a couple of times, just from watching this time as an observer, is active listening as a leader, and that's something you just alluded to. So Parker, you've been at Suffolk a long time. How important as a leader, getting up there in the chain of command, right, is it to listen to everybody in that pressure environment, whether it's at Suffolk Tech, because you're doing pressure-packed things too. You're making important financial decisions. You're evaluating new businesses all the time. that we have to commit to or not, these can be complex relationships in kind of pressure-packed rooms. How important is active listening, and what will you do differently to bring back to the United States?
Listening can be everything in some situations. I know in particular, for us, building that consensus across diverse opinions is really important. And I think diversity can maybe lose a lot of its value if you can't build any sort of consensus. So if people continue to have differing opinions, yet there's no way to find any commonality between them or make a decision, that can actually work against you. I think the same rings true for at Suffolk and certainly at Suffolk Technologies. I think to Tim's point, you do want to hear from everybody on the team. And that can be challenging for some people who haven't been there for a long time. But I think that's really important to have fresh perspective and have people that feel comfortable speaking up because their opinion and their point of view matters. And they have different perspectives on life and they've had different experiences, and bringing that all together to make the best decision for the team is ultimately what we're after. And as a leader, I think it's really important that you drive that and have people feel comfortable on your team to give you their point of view, and so you can synthesize it and drive consensus in the team.
So that directly applies to Suffolk in a couple of different ways in terms of what you just said. There's new people here in Normandy with us in senior leadership positions at Suffolk. They get put on this subarctic team with people who've been here for significant periods of time, who know our culture. Getting them to speak, and by the way, some of them maybe are extroverts, some of them are introverts, but getting them to speak to get their opinions is critical to the process, right? And as a leader, both of whom are comfortable here now, having been here for a while and knowing your jobs and knowing that you're successful, part of your responsibility as a leader is to get those people drawn out, right? Those newer folks. At Suffolk, we have a lot of new people all the time because that's the nature of the industry. The company's growing. We're pursuing America's Contractor 2028. Talent acquisition is a critical part of it. What's the key leadership principle that we can bring back to the United States in terms of onboarding and integrating really large amounts of new people across operations and all the different types of operations we have, some regionally based, some in far-flung places where we have to build complex buildings away from a corporate office or a regional office. How do you bring those folks in operationally, functionally, and try to accelerate, get them comfortable with speaking up and integrating into their teams? And this is a hard question, right? This is a complicated question because our turnover is low, but we need a lot of new folks, and we need to bring them in, teach them the Suffolk way, teach them our culture. What's a takeaway from subarctic that you can bring home to help us do that better as leaders in each of your respective areas? Tim, let's start with you.
So one of the things that we focus a lot on at Suffolk is around process, right? So that's processes for decision making, that's processes for implementation, that is the consistency that I talked about when we first opened here about how it is that we can translate the best of what Suffolk has to offer in one area of the business to another area of the business. Being able to bring folks into the fold in terms of what those processes are and those expectations early on is important because those are the platforms with which we give voice to folks to be able to give diverse experiences and recommendations about how it is that we deliver on projects. And that's everything from the considerations of technology. Somebody may come into Suffolk and say, hey, I have a really good idea from a prior life about how we did something. Well, we want to give them the platform to be able to speak to those things so that we can evolve as an organization, getting better with all the new talent that we bring into the organization. And so the way that we go about that in terms of how it is that we make decisions on projects, how it is that we set our teams up for success, does go through a semblance of a process. And knowing what that is as a leader to help guide future or new leaders within the organization is probably the best platform that we have to assess our current ideals about how it is that we deliver and then try to continuously improve upon those.
Good answer. Parker, what do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about making people feel comfortable. I think in feeling a sense of ownership and in pride of what we do, understanding how we do things, but then also understanding that we like people who challenge the way that we do things and not being afraid, again, to speak up. And your job as a leader is to make sure people do feel comfortable speaking up and do feel like their opinion, right, wrong, or indifferent, is appreciated and isn't taken into consideration. That's a very challenging thing to draw out of people who are new to an organization or people that have a lot less experience than some folks in the organization who have been building buildings for 40 years. But I think, to Tim's point, I think it's about connecting new folks to something bigger than just that individual and that specific decision or that one conversation or that one building. And for us, where we want to get the organization to over the next 5, 10, 20 years, it's going to take us changing things. And I think in order for us to get there, it's really important that the new people that we bring in feel comfortable to challenge the way that we've done things for a while, right? If we turned over a building 6 months early, 7 years ago, we're not going to do it the same way today. And so it's important to refresh that thinking. And that's all about culture, in my opinion. You have to make sure that people who are new to the organization feel a sense of belonging. They feel like they could make a mistake and they wouldn't be let go the next day.
It's safe to make a mistake.
Absolutely. And again, that's not easy to do, but I think that's one of the most important things that you can do as a leader, is make your team feel comfortable, feel a sense of belonging, and then feel pride about what we're trying to accomplish overall.
Again, just observing it this time with the group I was with, it took a few minutes for people to get confident enough to speak freely. And then I saw two things happen. One, when someone did speak freely, if they were well received, they spoke again. If they were sort of cast aside or like, that's not a good idea, it took another 10 minutes for them to speak again. And then you're under the gun because you're on the clock. In real life, maybe that junior person on the job site doesn't speak again for 3 months, and we're missing opportunities, to have them speak up and bring good ideas to the table. So I do think one of the key things on subarctic for me is not everyone's opinion will result in the decision in a material way, but voices should be heard. If you believe we're hiring the right people, which I do, we want to hear from them. And then everyone's opinion kind of gets distilled, and then it's either a group decision like it was in subarctic, or sometimes it's a chain of command-based decision where someone in a leadership position has to take all the information in and basically decide what to do, which is something that we've learned about a lot here in Normandy. Obviously, not a lot of people knew everything that was going on at the command headquarters, but there was a lot of information there, including things like the weather, where somebody had to decide, General Eisenhower ultimately had to decide and take a risk based on the weather, when to go or no go. That was his call, but it was based on a lot of information from a lot of people. Those people had to speak up. That's some personal risk to do it, and I think those concepts, at least, apply to subarctic, and they apply in a much, much smaller way to things that we're trying to do to get people comfortable at Suffolk.
An interesting dynamic that I saw amongst just not my team, but other teams too, is that the leader is sometimes not obvious, meaning that it doesn't always have to be within a certain level of hierarchy or rank within the organization. What we saw across some of the groups is that the leaders that took command of certain situations, because it was a complex scenario that we were given, right? There was navigation, there was concerns about survival, there was concerns about eating,
a lot of
water,
skills involved,
a lot of skills involved, right? And so there were different opportunities for people to take a leadership role within the team dynamic. I think what is most important is that everybody on the team was a leader in some regard, and there is the recognition individually that you are a leader, and there's a place for you on the team to be able to help make the team better in some way. It's really an obligation that you have to the team to take that leadership role in that area or realm where you can provide the most value, understanding what that is, because if everybody tries to provide value over everything, it all gets diluted. But as you start to form that team, when you understand where your leadership value is and you capitalize on that, that's really what makes the team a lot better. But then you layer on top of that the issue that we all survive every day, which is time. We don't have time, right? And so you have only so much time to figure out where those skill sets apply and how to apply those skill sets. But it's really important that everybody takes the initiative on their skill and expertise and figures out how they should be affecting the outcome and providing value in there and providing their own sense of leadership, because leadership doesn't come from just one person.
We actually had a professional, somebody who had trained in land navigation on our team. That added a different dynamic that's not dissimilar to the dynamic on a lot of our job sites, where someone's been here for 20 plus years. They know the people, they know the processes, they've built 6, 7 buildings with Suffolk. And how do you take their expertise and then act upon that, but you don't want to over-index on it, right? So it was really interesting to take somebody who had been trained in more situations that were similar to this than the rest of us, for sure. But then you're taking other people's opinions who have probably never hiked a day in their life, and how do you balance those two things out and
with
pick
people's
up on
lives
the,
at stake, by the way,
absolutely,
right?
And try
Literally.
to pick up on the commonalities there and build that consensus from a completely diverse and interesting group. So I think that for me was one of probably the biggest takeaways on our group in particular, just because we had a unique individual, which again, not dissimilar to Suffolk. There's always going to be somebody in the room who should be the de facto kind of leader. And it's not always the case, I think, to Tim's point, right? They can contribute in certain ways, but it's not always going to be the loudest voice or the person that has the most experience who ends up actually being the leader. And I think, relating back to your Eisenhower point of view is, two of those people said they didn't want to go on D-Day, right? And he still had to go against them. And so I think that's something that's resonating with me over this week here, is you're going to have to go against people eventually who are going to have a differing point of view or a differing opinion to you.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that's really important. And again, what happened with the Supreme Allied Command, there's so many lessons here, and we're super careful to not really compare that to what we're talking about. But there are leadership things in there that I think are key takeaways. One of those is what you just said, which is, in this exercise, you have 8 or 10 people on the team, and there's people who emerge naturally based on maybe their subject matter expertise. We had a Boy Scout in our group who volunteered that he had been a Boy Scout, and he had a lot of relevant experience for the group. So that emerged through the first few minutes. Overall, I think when you look at what happened in 1944 and you think about chain of command and decision making and leadership, inevitably not everyone's going to agree. You're trying to build consensus and you're trying to compromise. What do you do as a leader when you know that 2 people on the team, as relevant as anyone else, don't think you're making the right decision? You make the decision anyway, and you need them on board. How do you make sure as a leader they feel validated and still ready to execute? Because at Suffolk Construction, we need everybody to execute. What do you think, Tim?
It's an interesting dynamic, and it happens in every team because everybody has, these unique and diverse perspectives. They also have an opinion about how things need to get done, but eventually a decision needs to be made. One of the things that Parker alluded to was I think, of consequence to our group is that sometimes you need to make a decision early and set a plan, because a plan is meant to be adjusted. Having everybody understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish is really important. The way that we go about it sometimes, strategically can also change. And so having those diverse perspectives is really important up front. You'll make a decision about what direction you need to go. And eventually people need to understand why they're doing what they're doing and what it is that they're trying to accomplish, so they can figure out how they individually contribute to that. And that's probably the most important thing, is that people understand what the common mission is and they can figure out what their role needs to be in that. However, those diverse perspectives that you had in there, whether it was, around, there were some interesting things about D-Day, about the decision to go or not to go and when to go or not to go. Some had to do with weather, some had to do with the sea conditions, some had to do with the condition or space of the enemy or the atmosphere. And there was a lot of contributing factors that says we need to go now or we should wait. A decision eventually needed to be made on when the invasion was going to happen. People got alignment around there, but then adjustments had to be made throughout the course there. And so those diverse perspectives, I think, once they're understood, that they're heard, then I think it's easier for people to accept the fact that a plan has been laid, because as the environment is changing, lots of key and critical adjustment decisions get made to that plan. And so just because you may decide that, hey, we're going today against the advice or counsel of two different individuals, there's a lot of contributing factors to that, and there may be a time with which you pull back. There was, for instance, certain beaches that were going to be stormed that didn't get stormed because an adjustment had to be made based on some of those factors that may have caused us to not go in the beginning. Those decisions, those criteria, that information becomes valuable or invaluable as the plan gets adjusted. And so I don't think it's not an all or nothing type thing when a decision needs to get made. That criteria is still heard and adjustments can still be made. And as long as people understood or know that they've been heard and that criteria or their concerns get incorporated into adjustments or decisions along the course of the path of implementation, I think that's what will bring the team together, is that they understood that they're contributing and that they're being heard.
That's a really good point. Let's talk about that for a second. Parker, same fact pattern, right? Picking up on what Tim just said, you have 2 team members who gave you certain advice that you're not going to follow, having distilled all the information. You make a decision, you have to go execute on whatever you're doing. How important is it that there's trust from them to you and you to them when you have dissent on the team?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, and I think for me and a lot of what we saw in our group during the exercise was transparency built a lot of trust. So if you're the leader and you have to make a decision based on the information that you have available to you, I think at one point in time I heard you have 20% of the information you need before you make a decision. So I think the ability to be transparent to your team and let them know, make them feel like, you heard what they said and you're internalizing that and you're trying to synthesize that information as best you can, but you're still going to plan to do something else and you have to give reasons as to why. Part of being a good leader is being able to be extremely transparent to people from whom you're asking for information. I think that's what builds a lot of trust, and that way your team understands the way that you synthesize information, the way that you make decisions. And I think that will start to have a snowball effect over time because people understand the way that you want information provided and the way that the team's going to make a decision at the end of the day. And so for me, I think just making sure you're not a black box, just making a decision internally and then relaying it back to the team, making sure they're understanding what's going on in your mind. How are you taking in the two people that don't want to do something, but you're still making a choice to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, and I think what both of you said really resonates, and the way I look at it is, even if a decision has to be made that not everyone agrees with, or say, put it in the context of my life, if I have to make a decision where I have dissension on the team, I need to work harder to communicate to them that even though I didn't necessarily take all of their advice, I value all of their advice. And I want that advice all the time going forward because I need it as I distill things in a transparent way. If you can get to that point with a team and they actually trust you, then there's less, I think, hurt feelings when someone's advice isn't followed and they're still confident enough to speak up after the fact. So, but it's a complex
it's not easy
relationship situation, right? I mean, one of the things about subarctic and the Normandy experience in general, so much of what we do to achieve success or achieve whatever the objective is about relationships, right? And this unique exercise that we did recently here crystallizes in a very short amount of time, a 35-minute exercise with some people who know each other really well, some people who don't know each other really well, how to manage through those relationships. And I think that's something that we focus on every day at Suffolk, which can at times be a relatively intense and high-pressure environment where we're trying to achieve things every single day. So that's certainly something to think about as we leave Normandy.
I also think we tend to be very driven by action, in particular at Suffolk. We love activity. We love when people are up early and achieving things and moving very fast. And something that's resonating with me is how do I take the learning experiences from something like the subarctic exercise and actually apply that back to the work I'm trying to do at Suffolk?
You're a step ahead of me, as usual, Parker. That's the next question. What are we going to do both with subarctic, and you can answer this however you want, obviously, but with this exercise and with all the different things we've talked about and learned about during this week in Normandy? What are you going to bring home to pass on and cascade to your teams? I would say both you individually as a leader and things that you can share.
I think for me the most important thing to bring home is going to be an ability to build consensus amongst a group of diverse individuals and to drive towards some sort of common goal that people can relate to. I think a couple of things that have been a pretty clear takeaway from here, maybe not as much on the subarctic side, but more on what we've been doing in Normandy, has been people's ability to put aside their individual wants and their individual goals and try to achieve something greater than them. And that's not going to be easy to drive. That's very difficult. It takes a lot of planning. And something in particular that was probably of utmost interest to me was just learning how much actually went wrong on the day that these folks stormed the beaches here in Normandy.
So many variables against the Allies that they still overcame.
It's amazing when you look back at it, and I was unaware of that. So, there's going to be a lot, I think, more on the leadership side, a lot of characteristics of what it takes to be a good leader that I want to try to bring home, and I think, the rest of the Suffolk leaders are going to try to do the same. And I think a lot of that comes to building up teams who have trust in you, who you can inspire, and who aspire to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And I think every single person that, was here or I guess is here now with us today, I think is feeling a sense of wanting to aspire to be part of something bigger than themselves. And that's what it's going to take to achieve something great. And so I think for me, I need to do a lot of soul searching internally to find what that is that drives that kind of sense of belonging and sense of being over something greater than just themselves. And that's not going to be easy to do in a business world in particular. It's very, very different than what had happened here. So I think it's going to be a lot of making sure your team feels very valued, number one. Number two, I think it's going to be about trying to get people to believe in something that's bigger than themselves.
So I like the way you frame it, though. Inspire, right? To get people to aspire, and I think that directly applies to Suffolk teams, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about and learning about this week. And I think the challenge is kind of execution in a business environment where it's very different.
Yeah, maybe, last thing, and I think Tim alluded to this earlier, but it's not always going to be the hardest working person or the person that's in the limelight that is the leader. I think, there's been a lot of lessons learned here of, the local people who were sharing information and people didn't know about that, right? And so there's
During the resistance.
During the resistance, absolutely. So there's a lot of these factors that come into play that are subterranean, right? That are subsurface that might not be visible to the eye. But to me, a good leader is the person that's able to take in that and make sure their people feel valued, and the people that are doing the thankless tasks, so to speak, feel a part of something bigger and feel valued and appreciated for the work that they're doing and recognized for that work that they're doing.
So to that point, we learned so many things this week, and came in having prepared and read a lot about Normandy, but what you just referred to is absolutely true. Sometimes surprising leaders emerge, given the opportunity, regardless of where they are in a military chain of command or in a Suffolk chain of command. But as a leader now, you have to give them the opportunity to emerge, and I think that's really well said. So we're out of time. Really appreciate you guys joining us this morning here in Normandy. A lot of great points, a lot of important insights, and had a great week here with you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jay.
Now, on to part 2 of our episode, our discussion with Boris Groysberg. One of the things that I want to talk about in a little bit more detail is your perspective on the results, because I think the results are always revealing, but the results for Suffolk Construction and the culture that we have, individual versus team, were exceptionally revealing. Can you elaborate on that?
So when you have, many times when we do it, there are a lot of teams, right? It's like 3 teams, so it was more limited. But usually when you do it, you have positive scores, you have negative scores, because some teams have like negative dynamics and so on. So one is, all our scores were very positive. And I'm talking about like big numbers. I think the average was like 50%, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think the team that won had 60% plus. So that means, just to be clear, right? So their average individual scores compared to the team score. And the gain was, the way to think about it is return on investment. So the team has kind of outperformed the average individual by about 60%. And most importantly is that they outperformed every single member of the team, right? So not only they improved on the average, but the team did better than everybody else, and on a task that nobody knew anything about. Yeah.
There were some interesting team dynamics, because you had people from different levels, as you said, very diverse teams, and some of the conversations were complicated, and these people are in these conversations trying to get along, and still they came out in every case with a much, much better result than anticipated. And I think that's part of the Suffolk culture in some ways, because we do so much work in teams. And then on project sites, every day on a Suffolk project site, and I know you've been to many, there is a series of team meetings, whether it's safety, whether it's ops, and then when something may go wrong, like it did for our Allied Expeditionary Forces, you have to improvise and adapt and overcome, and that takes individualized leadership in that team environment. That's one of the messages of the Arctic survival exercise, I think, right?
Yeah, so I to be honest, whatever I teach, there are certain things that I expect. I expect some teams to do really well. I expect some teams to do really poorly, right? And even the teaching plan, how I do it, kind of, right? Like, what do you do well? Why didn't it work? And observe. So I was really, really surprised, right? And I'm especially surprised by the magnitude of improvement.
Yeah.
So when in talking to your colleagues, right, and I realized that, and I should have realized that earlier, is that you guys solve problems, right? Every single day. A lot of people solve problems, and they solve urgent problems, right? So this was also 35 minutes urgent problem with incomplete data, right? This is incomplete data, right? With some people you know, some people you don't. This is just like, it's a lot of things that you do on a daily basis, just prepare for them to come together. So the 4 things that we emphasize: how do you make decision, kind of participation, kind of influence, and kind of conflict and conflict resolution, right? Like when at least the teams that I observed were just going through that with different dynamics, but they yet got to really to the right outcome.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I'll tell you, the surprise, is that everybody talked about strategy. A lot of times I do it, there are teams that actually go and do the rankings, forgetting that, by the way, in this particular case, the strategy is do you stay or do you go, right?
Right.
And
That's the most important decision.
that's the most right, because the rankings could be different, are different for the different strategies. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was really powerful, and it seems like people learned it, and it was a good setup to talk about teams the following day, right?
Exactly. You've been listening to Suffolk's Lessons in Leadership. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another leadership conversation. Thanks for listening.